There is a strategy as old as warfare itself, and it goes like this. If you want to defeat a people, you do not have to destroy their army. You do not have to burn their cities. You do not even have to win on the battlefield. All you have to do is make them forget who they are. Make them ashamed of their history. Make them confused about their identity. Make them uncertain about whether what they have is worth defending. And eventually, without a single shot being fired, they will hand you everything. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not accusing anyone of a grand conspiracy. I'm not saying there is a room somewhere with a whiteboard and a master plan. What I am saying is that there are forces, ideological, cultural, philosophical forces that have been working for decades to accomplish exactly this in America, to sever us from our roots, to make us strangers to our own heritage. And as we sit here celebrating 250 years of American independence, I want to look honestly at how successful that effort has been and what the church has to do with it. Welcome back to What's Important Now.
Welcome to the What's Important Now broadcast. In America today, we are witnessing a cultural shift. This is the show devoted to the battle for the soul of our country. Join our host, Tom Sears, as he explains the issues of our day and join the fight to bring values and morality back. Let's join Tom now as he shares what's important now.
Welcome to part 3 of 250 Years Did We Keep the Republic, a 4-part series. Today's episode, The Erasing of America's Heritage. Before we dive in, I want to talk about where you can go to learn more about our program, our podcast, and also see the other podcasts we have in the works, legacylivingmedia.com. And also don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcasting platform, share it, review it, love it. We're thankful. Okay, let me explain how historical revisionism works, because most people think of it as a dramatic event, sort of a bonfire, a statue being pulled down, a book being banned. And yes, we've seen all of those things. But the most effective revisionism is much quieter than that. It's patient, it's methodical, and it works through institutions. Typically working through 3 stages: omission, reframing, and replacement. Now, stage 1, again, is omission, and you don't have to lie about history if you can simply stop teaching it. If you can ensure that 2 or 3 generations of American students graduate without ever reading a primary source from the founding era, without ever encountering Washington's farewell address or John Adams' letters or the sermons of the Black Robe Regiment, or the original state constitutions that explicitly acknowledge the Christian faith, then those founders will exist only as whoever the popular culture decides to make them. And the popular culture has not been generous. In 1994, the national standards for the U.S. history were released, a proposed curriculum framework developed by university historians and education experts, and it was meant to be a blueprint for how American history would be taught in public schools. The document mentioned McCarthyism 19 times. It mentioned the Ku Klux Klan 17 times. It mentioned Harriet Tubman 6 times, which is appropriate. She's a historical, heroic figure. Guess how many times it mentioned George Washington? Once. In passing. The man who commanded the Continental Army, presided over the Constitutional Convention, and served as the first president of the United States. He was mentioned exactly 1 time. Now, I want to be fair. That particular framework was eventually withdrawn after public backlash, but the instinct it represented, the instinct to treat the founding as something to minimize or qualify rather than something to celebrate and understand, and that instinct has never gone away. It is still shaping curriculum decisions in school districts and textbook publishing houses all across America. Stage 2, reframing. This is where you take the figures and the events that you cannot completely erase because they're too famous, they're too central, and you reinterpret them through the lens that strips them of the very things that made them significant. Jefferson becomes a deist hypocrite who owned slaves. Washington becomes a wealthy land speculator whose piety was performance. Franklin becomes a womanizing skeptic. The founding becomes not a movement of providence, but a cynical arrangement by wealthy white men to protect their own power while using the language of God and liberty as cover. Now, I want to address this directly because it gets used to shut down conversation. Yes, many founders owned slaves. That's a moral catastrophe. Everybody hear me. Moral catastrophe. It was a contradiction, a stunning, agonizing contradiction between the principles they articulated and the practices they maintained. And it took a civil war and more than 200,000 lives to begin resolving that contradiction. But here is what the revisionist narrative never tells you. The very principles that were used to abolish slavery, the principles that abolitionists like Frederick Douglass and William Wilberforce appealed to, were the founding principles. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, life, and liberty. Frederick Douglass, a man who had been enslaved, who had every reason to reject the founding documents as fraudulent, stood up on July 5th, 1852, and said that the Constitution, properly interpreted, was a glorious liberty document. He didn't throw the founding away because of its contradictions. He wielded the founding against those contradictions. And that is the honest story of American history, not the story of a founding that was pure and without flaw. It wasn't. But a founding whose principles were true enough and powerful enough to eventually correct even the founding's own failures. That story, the real story, is being replaced. Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. When we take men who genuinely feared God, genuinely believed in providence, genuinely sacrificed for a cause they believed was righteous, and then we reduce them entirely to their worst moments while ignoring the faith and the courage that animated their finest hours, we're not doing history. We're doing something else entirely. Stage 3, replacement. Once omission and reframing have done their work, you replace the old story with a new one. A story where America's founding was not a moment of providence, but a moment of oppression, where the heroes of the founding are villains, where the source of America's greatness is not her Christian moral framework, but something else entirely, usually defined as her ability to evolve beyond that framework. And this is where we are in 2026. And the 250th anniversary celebrations are, in many ways, a showcase of how complete the replacement has become. So let me bring this right down to the present moment, because we're living inside the 250th anniversary celebration right now. There are major events happening across the country: Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Boston. There's a White House task force. There are special coins from the U.S. Mint, special exhibitions at the Smithsonian, synchronized 4th of July celebration being billed as the largest in American history. And I've spent time looking at the programming, reading the official materials, examining what the America 250 organization is highlighting and what it isn't. And here's what I notice. And this is what you should notice, because it's the absence that bothers me. The official America 250 mission statement says the goal is to reflect on the nation's past, honor the contributions of all Americans, and look ahead toward the future. And that's fine as far as that goes. That's great. But what you will not find as a central theme, what is absent in the official narrative, is the story of how the Christian faith shaped this nation. The providence of God in the founding, the biblical worldview of our founders, the covenant relationship that helps us understand America's purpose. None of that is the lead in to the 250th anniversary story. It's not even in the supporting cast. It's been edited out. Now think about what that means. Here we are having a 250th birthday party for a nation. And the guest of honor, the God who the founders themselves credited with bringing this nation into being, is not even invited. George Washington dedicated the nation to Almighty God at his inauguration. And 237 years later, we're celebrating the nation he dedicated without mentioning the God he dedicated it to. That is not neutrality. That is a deliberate choice. And it reflects how thoroughly the revisionist project has succeeded. I also want to say something about this dominant theme of the official celebrations, which is many voices, many stories. The narrative of diversity and shared values, and look at it this way. I believe every human being has dignity because every human being is made in the image of God. I say that like with 100% certainty. I believe in the equal worth of every single person, regardless of their background. That is not only my personal belief, that's a biblical conviction. That's not a political one. It's a biblical conviction that resides in my heart. But here's the problem. When the story of America becomes purely a story of many voices, many perspectives, and many equally valid traditions all coming together, when the founding Christian consensus gets dissolved into just one perspective among many, something essential is lost. Because America was not founded on many perspectives. It was founded on a specific conviction about God and natural law and human dignity, and the founders intended that to be the case. But you cannot pretend the tradition was built by no one in particular. There is a difference between a table that is open to everyone and a table that was built by no one. America's table was built by someone. And the 250th anniversary is the moment to tell that story clearly. Instead, we're watching it get buried under a celebration that has been carefully scrubbed of the very thing that made it possible. So, if I could, I want to spend a few minutes talking about how the erasing happened institutionally, because it didn't happen by accident. It happened through specific institutions making specific decisions over many decades. The university system is where it started. Beginning in the late 19th century and accelerating through the 20th, American universities shifted away from their founding purpose. And I don't know if you knew this, I've talked about this in previous programs. Most of the original American universities were founded explicitly to train Christian ministers and to educate citizens in a Christian moral framework, and toward a secular, progressivist model of education. Harvard, for instance, founded in 1636 with the explicit purpose of training Puritan clergy. Yale, founded in 1701 to preserve Calvinist orthodoxy when Harvard was perceived to be drifting. Princeton, founded in 1746 as the College of New Jersey by the Presbyterian Revivalist. Every single one of the original Ivy League schools was founded with an explicit Christian purpose. Today, those schools are among the most aggressively secular institutions in America. Again, that's a transformation that does not happen overnight. It happened through decades of faculty hiring, curriculum decisions, institutional culture shifts, and the deliberate marginalization of Christian perspectives. And those universities trained the teachers, who then trained the next generation of students, who became the journalists, the politicians, the judges, the filmmakers. The secular worldview of the elite university has been propagating itself through every major institution of American culture for over 100 years. The legal system is another front. Supreme Court decisions of 62 and 63, as I talked about in the last episode, removing prayer and Bible reading from schools, they were not isolated rulings. They were part of a larger judicial philosophy that reinterpreted the First Amendment's Establishment Clause from its original meaning. Congress shall make no law establishing a national denomination, to something much broader. That any acknowledgement of God in the public square by any government entity is unconstitutional. The founders never intended that. The men who wrote the First Amendment opened every session of Congress with prayer. Sounds like a contradiction. They issued national days of prayer and fasting. Again, contradicting. They inscribed "In God We Trust" on the national currency. The idea that acknowledging God violates the Constitution would have been incomprehensible to them. But that reinterpretation became law, and law shapes culture, and culture shapes belief, and belief shapes the next generation. And then there's media. For the last 50 years, the dominant media culture in America has treated traditional Christianity with a combination of condescension and hostility that it would never direct at any other faith tradition. Christian beliefs are portrayed as backward. Christian history is treated as a source of shame. Christian influence in the founding is either ignored or it's just explained away. Now, I'm not trying to produce anger here. I'm saying it so you understand the scope of what we are dealing with. This is not one thing. It is many things working in the same direction over a long period of time. And then that cumulative effect is a culture that no longer knows its own foundation. Now, I need to say something, and it's going to be uncomfortable. I need you to hear it in the spirit of which I mean it, which is the spirit of a man who loves the church of Jesus Christ and grieves over what the church has become in too many places. Because the erasing of America's Christian heritage did not happen only because of secular progressives in academia or activist judges or a hostile media culture. Those things are real, and I've described them accurately. But the erasure also happened because the church let it happen. We retreated. If you go back to the mid-20th century, a significant and influential portion of the evangelical church in America adopted what I would call a theology of cultural retreat. The reasoning went something like this: the world is getting worse. The end is near. The mission of the church is to save souls, not to engage culture. Politics is dirty. Culture is corrupt. The best thing to do is to keep your head down. Focus on Sunday morning. Stay out of the fray and don't make waves. And while the church was retreating, while we were focused on keeping our own houses clean, the culture was being occupied. Schools, universities, media, legal institutions, public square, one by one, ground was surrendered. Not because the enemy was stronger than God, but because the people of God simply didn't show up. Again, think about what happened in 1962 when the Supreme Court ruled against school prayer. Where was the church? There were some voices of protest, but there was no sustained, organized, theologically grounded response. The church shrugged their shoulders, shook their head, and moved on. And then that pattern repeated itself decade after decade. Every time the culture moved further from its Christian foundations, the church's response was either outrage that it quickly faded, or they just resigned to what was going on and dressed it up as piety. We're not of this world. Our kingdom is not here. We're just pilgrims passing through. Technically, those statements are true. Those are true statements. But they've been used as an excuse for walking away from a responsibility that Scripture never released us from. Because the same Bible that says we are citizens of heaven also says we are the salt and light in this world. Right now, in this moment, in this culture, salt preserves, light reveals, but both require engagement. Both require presence. Both require being somewhere uncomfortable and doing something difficult. Matthew 5, verses 13 and 14, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Salt that stays in the salt shaker, well, it doesn't preserve anything. Light that stays under a basket doesn't illuminate anything. And a church that retreats from culture doesn't preserve culture, it surrenders it. Think back to the Black Robe Regiment. They did not retreat. Those pastors understood that the pulpit was a platform for truth in every dimension of human life, not just the spiritual, but the moral, the historical, the civic. They preached about tyranny and liberty and the rights of man because they understood that the gospel has implications for all of human life, not just the afterlife. And somewhere in the 20th century, we lost that understanding. We accepted a version of Christianity that was concerned with heaven, but indifferent towards earth. That was passionate about personal salvation, but passive about cultural engagement. And the culture we abandoned is now being filled by people who have very strong views about what should go there. So, what do we do with all this? Because I never want to be the program that tells you how bad everything is and then I send you on your way feeling helpless. It's not what we're here for. So here's what I want to give you. 3 things, specific things. Again, for this week, and again, this has been sort of the direction of this special series. Number 1, know history yourself, because you cannot defend what you do not know. You cannot teach what you have not learned. And the history of America's Christian heritage is rich and deep and documented and accessible. Read David Barton's work. This is a guy that has spent decades documenting the primary sources. Read Mark Hall's book, Did America Have a Christian Founding? It is thorough, it is scholarly, and it is fair to the complexity of the evidence. But it's also devastating to the revisionist narrative. Here's an idea. Read the founders themselves. As I've said in the last couple episodes, read Washington's farewell address. Read the Federalist Papers. Read the original state constitutions. They're all online. They are free. And they will change how you see this country. Number 2, teach it in your sphere. Deuteronomy 6 is a command. It's not a suggestion. When you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you rise up, the passing on of the heritage is not a church program. It's a daily, relational, ongoing act of discipleship. Talk about this stuff at your dinner table. Buy your grandchildren books about the founding. Take them to historical sites. I'm afraid they're all going to disappear. Make America's Christian heritage a living thing in your household, not a relic that only gets mentioned on the 4th of July. Number 3, refuse to be embarrassed by it. This is perhaps the most important one right now, because one of the primary weapons of the revisionist project is social embarrassment. Because if they can make you feel like claiming that America has a Christian heritage is somehow bigoted or naive or you're unsophisticated, if they can make you hesitate before you speak, they've already won the battle. I want to say this clearly. You have nothing to be embarrassed about. The historical record is clear. Primary sources are available. The faith of our founding fathers is documented in their own words, ladies and gentlemen. You're not making this up. You're not reading things into history that aren't there. You are standing on solid, documented, verifiable, historical ground. And ladies and gentlemen, stand there. Stand there without apology. Stand there with confidence, with love for people who have been misled, but without shame for the truth. Because the erasing is real. And the stakes, well, they're higher than they've ever been. The hour is late. But the God who raised up this nation, he hasn't put in for his retirement plan. He's not surprised by what we are facing today. He's not wringing his hands, wondering how this happened. And he is looking, always looking for people who will stand up and say, not on my watch. The question is, are you one of those people? I believe you are. And that's why you're listening to this program. In the next episode, the final episode of this 4-part series, can America survive another 250 years? What does genuine revival look like? And what specific thing is God calling you to do right now? Episode 4. It's the one that's going to bring everything together, so you cannot miss it. Don't forget to visit legacylivingmedia.com, where you'll find What's Important Now and our other podcast. It's updated when our programs go live. Also, whether it's Spotify, Spreaker, Apple iTunes, Amazon, I even seen our program on Audible's podcasting. Wherever you listen to your podcast, please make sure you subscribe, you like, and you share. Because what that does is that helps us get it into more ears. Super important, right? More people listening, that it expands our audience. So make sure you do that. And we appreciate you for doing so. We appreciate you for being here. So don't forget, fight the good fight of faith. Contend for the faith. There is a cause. It does matter. And it is important now. This has been episode 3 of the 4-part series, 250 Years, Did We Keep the Republic? And we continue with the final episode, part 4. Stay tuned. Coming your way soon. Take care. God bless. I'm Tom Sears, and this has been What's important now.